Hello, my dear friend. Welcome back to another episode of the Reflective Parenting Podcast. My name is Cindy Hovington and I'm your host. I am a mom of three from Montreal, Canada, and I have a Ph.D. in neuroscience. My goal through this podcast is not to give you another parenting podcast, but to be a podcast for parents. I want to make sure that you feel supported and that you build your confidence and see that you do have it in you to parent the way that you want. In order to get to that, I have the science of certain skills that I think we all need. And so I share mostly around emotion regulation, relationship management. We talk about stress management. We talk about our emotions, our kids as well. And today we are focusing, today actually, and next week as well, we're going to focus on dealing with difficult people and getting to know ourselves along the way. So, you know how those small everyday moments when you feel deeply connected to someone you love, your child's spontaneous hug, your partner's hand reaching for yours, or even the moment of laughter that you share as a family at the dinner table? Well, most of us let those moments pass us by, but research shows that they're far more powerful than we think. And so, what I've done for today's episode, as well as next week, is I interviewed two very special guests, authors of a new book that is out that I highly recommend. We're going to get into that in 1 second. But what I did is I cut their episode into two parts. And they said something at the beginning of the episode that I had to focus on it because of how important it is. And I had never spoken about that on the podcast. And so I dug into research. I got to learn about this a little bit more. I wrote a blog on the podcast, which is in the show notes. But I am going to focus a little bit of the intro and share a bit of the science right now before you get into it so that you understand what they are saying. My guests spoke about relational savouring. So, this is the science backed practice that helps us re experience those meaningful moments of connection. It's more than just gratitude or mindfulness, it's truly a way of remembering love so deeply that it changes how our brain and body respond to stress. Now, they also spoke about personality types. And so, if you have been told that you're too sensitive, I think you need to also listen to this episode. I'm keeping this one very short so that we focus on these two topics. And then next week, we're going to go deeper into their book so that you could really understand how to manage some more difficult relationships in your life, whether it's a friend, your partner, your child, your in law, or your own parent, or even with your partner. So before I talk about relational savouring, I'd like to thank the Tannenbaum Open Science Institute as well as the McConnell Foundation. Both of these organizations are supporting the podcast. And without their support, this podcast would not be here. I would not be here sharing this information with you. And so if you do enjoy the podcast, many of you have told me you've been listening to this for a few years, but just haven't taken the time to review or rate it. At the least, just rate it on 5 stars. You can do this on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. And if you have a few more seconds, you can leave a review. All of these make a difference and show my supporters that you really enjoy this podcast. I'm not just making it up. Also, what you can do, especially with this relational savouring episode, it's a short one. Share it on social media, share it in a newsletter that you have, share it on in a group chat that you have, perhaps with colleagues. If you have a subgroup on Slack of parenting, share this with people that you know would benefit from hearing about relational savouring. Those who are really struggling in their relationship, this might be something that can help them out. And even if they're really in the relationship with their child, relational savouring has research around that as well, with partners and with kids. That's what's just so fascinating about relational savouring. And so share this episode with as many people as you can, and that will be helpful to me as well. All right. So relational savouring, it's a concept that comes from Dr. Jessica Borelli. She's a clinical psychologist and researcher at the University of California, Irvine. Relational savouring is a guided reflection practice that invites people to vividly recall a warm, secure, or loving interaction using all of their senses. So you might remember how your child's hand felt in yours, the sound of their giggle, or the look on their face when they felt understood. Well, what makes relational savouring different from other positive psychology practices like gratitude or mindfulness is that it's relational. So it centers around connection. The goal isn't just to feel good, but to retrain the brain to notice safety, love, and trust. When we re-experience that warmth, our brain activates the same neural pathways involved in connection and co-regulation. It's like giving our nervous system a small, science-backed dose of calm and security. That's what I love about this area of research. So in 2023, Dr. Borelli and her colleagues published a study in the Infant Mental Health Journal called Savouring Interventions for Mothers of Young Children. So this has already been practiced in or studied in relationships, mostly in relationships. But what they wanted to look at was, does this still apply in the relationship that we have with our kids? So they wanted to know, can short relational savoring exercises actually reduce stress for parents and improve emotional connection between the parent and their kids? So this is what they did. The researchers worked with mothers of young children between the ages of 0 to 5. Participants were guided through brief relational savoring sessions where they recalled a specific warm, loving interaction with their child, something like cuddling after a meltdown or reading a bedtime story together. They were encouraged to slow down, notice sensory details, and reflect on what the moment meant to them. So if you recall a couple episodes ago, we spoke with Laura Pettix and we spoke about interoception. So this is where interoception is so important because we often miss those internal cues, that warmth in our chest when we are cuddling with our kids. The slowing of our heart rate rather than the opposite, which is the rising or increasing of our heart rate when we're feeling dysregulated or feeling like we're about to lose control of our emotions with our kids, right? We forget to notice the positive. So this wasn't a one-time reflection. Parents repeated the exercise regularly for several days or even weeks, allowing the brain's stress circuits to adapt over time. The results of the study were fascinating. So parents who practiced relational savoring reported lower stress levels, higher positive affect, so that's emotions, and greater feelings of closeness with their child. It also appeared to increase parental reflective functioning, which we've spoken about. We've had one of the great researchers around that, Dr. Nicole Le Tourneau. This was many episodes ago. I will put that as well in the show notes. And reflective functioning is the ability to understand a child's inner emotional world. So in simple terms, the more parents savored love, the easier it became to respond with calm and empathy instead of frustration and self-blame. Borelli's team suggests that this is because savoring activates the attachment system, helping the brain re-encode safety and connection. Over time, that builds emotional resilience, not just for the parent, but for the child too. Isn't it amazing how when we start with ourselves, it truly does trickle down to our kids? So why does this study matter for us parents? Well, it adds to the decades of research showing that our relationships, especially those rooted in emotional safety, have measurable effects on our biology. When we experience consistent love and predictability, our brain's HPA axis, so that's the stress regulation system, becomes more balanced. Oxytocin, the bonding hormone, helps reduce cortisol levels, and the nervous system begins to associate connection with calm instead of threat. For parents, this means that relational savoring isn't just a feel-good exercise. It's a way to rewire your stress response. Instead of automatically reacting from frustration, we get to pause, remember love, and regulate from a place of safety. We get to create our own place of safety through the really beautiful, loving moments that we share with our kid. Instead of seeing everything and every interaction with our kid as those that are contributing to our stress, we can rewire how we think and see these interactions with our kids and see more of the positive interactions, which will in turn create our own inner safety and reduce our overall stress. It's the neuroscience of parenting from connection rather than correction, which I've said a couple of times, which has been said by many experts. And so here's how you can practice this at home. First, if you are part of the Reflective Parent Club, we are taking this week, so Tuesday, we meet every single Tuesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time or 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Parents come when they can. And this is where we dig deeper into that week's Reflective Parenting Podcast. We take a concept from science or a concept from the many skills that we learn to practice, and we talk about it so that we can start implementing this in our home. And so for you, my dear listeners, I want to give you a very quick checklist that you can do within your home. But if this is something that you are interested in and you realize, wow, this is my time to join the Reflective Parent Club, which is often what new members say, then it's a great time to get access to the club, join for 1 week free, and start noticing that 1 hour that so many parents tell me they don't have, that 1 hour a week becomes that moment for yourself. That time where you say, I am pausing. I have been learning way too much and so ingrained in the idea that if the more I learn, the better of a parent I will be. When actually, what we should be doing is learning how to pause, connect with ourselves, and start building our self-awareness. And that's where all the education that you've taken the time to learn, this podcast, many other podcasts, the books you have read, will start truly being implemented. It's when you pause 1 hour a week. And so if you want to join, the link to the Reflective Parent Club is in the show notes, or you can visit curiousneuron.com and click on Become a Member. I know I promised you that our course will be coming out soon. I have been adding content to it that's going to make it even better than I had imagined. And so I encourage you to be patient if you are waiting for the course. That's self-led, but if you want me and other parents to be there by your side, it feels good to know that you are not alone, then you can join the club, which has been opened now for a year. All right, so my dear parents, here I have a few simple ways that you can start this in your home. So each night, think back to one small loving moment that you had with your child. Close your eyes and replay it. What did you see? What did you hear? And what did you feel in that moment? Maybe it was when they said, I love you at bedtime. Maybe it was when they gave you that really big, long, warm hug when you picked them up from school or daycare. Notice the warmth or calm that comes with this moment of reflecting back on that moment. Now reflect on what it meant about your relationship. Think about the love your child has for you. Even when we feel like we're failing as parents, this is what's so incredible about our kids. They remind us how much they look up to us and how much they love us. And so take a moment to reflect on that. How powerful it is to know that you have someone that loves you so much that you can mess up. And messing up is just a way of learning how to become the parent that you want. That's what you need to focus on in this moment. You can do the same with your partner, by the way, with your friend, with anybody that means something to you. In just a few minutes, you're reminding your brain what safety feels like and helping your nervous system find its balance again. And so if you go through this and you had dinner with a friend or coffee with a friend, or your partner helped you with something or placed their hand on your shoulder today and you just connected with that moment for a brief second, come back and relive that moment. As Dr. Borelli puts it, relational savouring helps us attend to experiences of safety and security and intentionally focuses on their meaning. It's a simple daily reflection that we can all practice in literally 2 minutes. But it also has a profound act on how we regulate our emotions, which is the focus of what we do here at Curious Neuron, teaching parents how to regulate their emotions. And so this teaches our brain and our child's brain how to return to calm through connection, which is so heavily backed by research, the importance of connection. And sometimes as parents, we can feel so lonely. And so today and next week, I'll be talking with the authors of Beyond Difficult, an attachment-based guide to dealing with challenging people. And I love the fact that it is an attachment-based guide. There is so much research behind what they share. And like I said to them in the podcast, I actually learned a lot about myself and how I am in interactions. And so it's going to help you understand others and yourself. Dr. Jessie Stern and Rachel Samson are co-authors on this book. And if you haven't heard of them yet, Rachel Samson is a psychologist. She's based out in Australia, and she has such an amazing platform online that allows you to understand emotions. Dr. Jessie Stern is based in the US and is a developmental psychologist. She is a professor at Pomona College, and she shares lots of science and research around relationships and as a foundation of mental health, brain development, physical health, and she helps you understand these relationships from infancy through adulthood. I'm so glad that I got to speak to both at the same time because they have a wealth of knowledge. I hope you enjoyed part one today, where we're going to talk about personality types in the dynamic in relationships, and we're going to talk about relational savouring. I will see you next week, and I hope you enjoy my conversation with Rachel and Jessie. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Reflective Parenting Podcast. And as promised, I am here with Rachel and Jessie. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much
Thank
for
you so
having me.
much.
I'm really excited to have both of you on, and even more excited to dive into your book. I had the pleasure of reading it. I have it on my Kindle, and it was one of those books that I thoroughly enjoyed. I think that there's going to be a lot for us to learn today. I think of all the conversations that I have with parents, and one thing that we don't realize, we think that we're not showing up for our kids in the way that we want to, and we blame it on ourselves, but we don't realize that we have this sort of unlimited capacity in our, it's not limited when it comes to dealing with different situations and people, and that every interaction, in the way that I see it, there's a bit of that capacity that's drained depending on the interaction. Some interactions drain us, some can, help us recharge depending on who it is. But you both have given us such important information in your book in terms of understanding the difficult people that we are with. And I went into this book reading it thinking I'm going to understand all the people around me, when I also started learning about myself. So thank you for doing that. Let's jump into this. I'm hoping that by the end of this conversation, parents will understand the different interactions, and sometimes that interaction is going to be with our child. And so hopefully we'll have given them some tools to help them with that. Let's start off with the way that you did. Actually, before we start off with that, I'm always curious to know, how did you come about this topic and coming together to write this book? I'm just curious to know how that came about.
Jessie and I actually met in 2018 at the University of Minnesota. We were both there training in assessing parent-child attachment, and we just connected over our love for attachment and nerded out on everything we were learning, but also got along really well and stayed in touch after the training. We just started writing together blog posts and different things like that. And then this idea for a book came about, initially a parenting book. And the hope was to bring in everything that we loved about attachment and sensitivity. But in the end, we were approached by a publisher who wanted us to make that content accessible for adults, and the way that attachment and sensitivity and temperament applied to relationships between adults. And so that's how Beyond Difficult was born.
That's interesting because I would still classify this as a book for parents. I still deeply feel that every parent needs to have this on their shelf and read through this, especially, well, every single part, but that first chapter allows you to understand the difference in people and brings in the attachment, temperament, neurodivergence, and all of that. I think that it's not just about like with our partners, it's all the interactions, and our kids are one of those interactions. I would look at it that way personally. Yeah. I'm glad
to hear you say
do.
that, Cindy.
That is so okay. That was my view once I finished it. I really felt that it was a book for parents. So I love the way you start this off by first getting us to think about the interactions that we have in our lives that are positive interactions. Why did you think of that? And I think that it's brilliant because then you contrast it compared to all the other ones that could be difficult. Why is it important for us to kind of think of that first?
I think it's helpful to have a North Star in mind in all of our interactions. There's some beautiful research by a mentor of mine, Jessie Borelli, who's a professor at UC Irvine, and she studies relational savouring in parents. So she will often ask parents to think about a time when they felt particularly safe or supported, or where they were nurturing their child in a way that gave them a sense of fulfillment, joy, or pride. And what she has found is that for parents who practice this kind of relational savoring, who are really bringing to mind a positive experience with their child, that they're subsequently much more sensitive. They're able to regulate their emotions better. They have more positive interactions with their children. So I think that's a good guide for all of us, whether it's a relationship with a child or a partner or another adult, is to try calling to mind the good stuff. most of us humans, myself included, have what's called a negativity bias.
Mm-hmm.
So the negative interactions in our lives take up more mental bandwidth. We're more likely to remember them. We're more likely to ruminate about them. I know
Mm-hmm.
that's true for me. So bringing some intentionality to, okay, what was the positive thing that happened today, and can I savor it, or can I savor the emotions so that they can build on each other? It also means that we know what green flags to look for in a relationship rather than just dwelling on all of the hurts that we've endured.
Right. I absolutely love that. We often hear about gratitude practice, but this relational savoring, it just brings about those interactions that we have. So we might not catch that when we're thinking about gratitude, but then we're focusing on the interactions. And I love that because as a parent, as a mom myself of three kids, I remember when they were young, it was really hard to find those moments of gratitude sometimes. At the end of the day, it was really challenging,
Mm.
especially during those hard moments. But when I started practicing that, then I started noticing the little things that I had missed, like a hug that was longer, one of my kids, just randomly saying, I love you. And you wouldn't catch that because you would look for the bigger moments, right? So I'm assuming it's the same in terms of relationships and the interactions that you have. You might just see that negative aspect of, I'm thinking of a parent or an in law. That might be hard
Mm.
because then you start to build that, I guess, the resentment or the more of the negative feelings in that interaction.
In
Absolutely.
the clinic, parents, adults are often coming to therapy to talk about the difficult people in their life. And it
Mm,
takes up so much real estate in our mind. And we can get so caught up in, why is this happening? Is this something that I've done? What's causing this? But if we do this relational savoring or think to some of the relationships that are easeful and nourishing, it's actually very validating then in highlighting how difficult the difficult relationship is. And I
mm,
think that can be really useful in finding perspective that sometimes it is some really challenging personality traits that we're dealing with, whether it be, an in-law or someone at work or whatever. But just reminding
mm,
ourselves, wow, I do have these really fulfilling relationships. I am someone that can have these beautiful moments with other people. And so sometimes that just helps us to unhook a little bit from the situation and think, okay, so maybe it is something very specific about this dynamic or this person.
mm.
Um, and that can just be really useful for people to gain that bigger perspective that it's not all relationships and it's not everyone, it's just some.
Right. We're going to dive into all of that. You talk about attachment and temperament and nervous systems as well, our nervous system. But before we do, I'm just curious, do you ever hear, because I've heard this when I talk about effective communication and dealing with difficult people, when I talk to parents, it feels sometimes when we tell them that we have to understand the other person, that we have to accept everything about that person. And that means that the onus is on us to just let them be a certain way, and I understand you, and so you can act that way. Do you ever hear that as well, or and how do you respond to that?
I have very strong feelings about that. It is a common response, I think, and common advice even that people do receive, that you need to just accept people as they are. There is that school of thought or that ideological approach. And that's not what we're talking about when we're
Mm,
saying accepting the way that things are. It's just acknowledging reality as it is
mm,
in this moment. So it's not saying I like this. It's not saying I condone this. It's not saying I want this to continue or I'm happy with this. It's just acknowledging what's happening in the moment. So if that was with a child, for example, if it has been, one of those days you were referring to, Cindy, where you've got young kids and it's really challenging, you don't have to say, wow, I accept this. It's really great. I'm happy my kids are behaving this way today. It's just saying, okay, today was a hard day. I have a 3-year-old who's struggling to regulate their emotion, and that is so hard for me
mm,
and for them. So we're acknowledging that it's hard. That's the acceptance piece, rather than, I will not stand for this. I will not have this. No, it can't be this way. And
mm,
really resisting with reality as it is in the moment. That's when people tend to experience an additional layer of suffering, when we're
mm.
struggling with reality as it is. So if we can just acknowledge that this is, then we're in a better position to then decide how we want to respond.
I like that approach, and it's so important to do that. I just want to clarify that you over and over again clarify this in the book, that it's not about accepting that and what you just explained. And I wanted to bring that up because I do hear it often. And so at least now we know we can all be on the same page that this is not what we are talking about today. In fact, the first part of your book really walks us through all the different things that can lead to some different or difficult, interactions. We're not going to go through all of them, but what's interesting to me is we talk a lot about the nervous system here at Curious Neuron, and part of what you talk about, and that's why I think it's still for parents, this book, because we understand you really share the science of the nervous system and understanding somebody's past and adversity and trauma and how that will impact the way that they respond and the way that they behave in interactions. So we've heard that. And so I want to move towards temperament and even attachment. Those are things we haven't spoken about a lot here, just a little bit. But what does that look like in terms of, again, I'm thinking of somebody's temperament. And when we hear about temperament, we say we can't change somebody's temperament. And so what does that look like in terms of having an interaction or difficult interaction or conversation with somebody who has maybe a more challenging temperament?
Yeah, I can touch on the temperament piece. If we use sensitivity as an example, so sensitivity is one dimension of temperament, and we all differ on how sensitive we are. So some of us have low levels of sensitivity and some of us have higher levels of sensitivity. A common difficulty that I see in the families that I work with is one person is highly sensitive and one person is much less sensitive. So if we take the perspective of the highly sensitive person, they are perceiving everything in the world at a higher volume. They're more sensitive to their surroundings. They're feeling their feelings more intensely in their body. They might be thinking about things more deeply. It can be harder to just switch off. And so they may be trying to communicate their experience to a partner who doesn't experience the world in the same way, and wanting that experience to be recognized as valid and just to be seen. And maybe there's requests as well around things that they would like in the environment that might make them more comfortable. Then if we take the perspective of someone who's less sensitive in that dynamic, they don't experience things so intensely. They may not even have any reference point for making sense of what that would be like. And so they're experiencing a situation in a totally different way and seeing the other person have these big reactions. And if we think of this in parenting, it may be that there's a child that's highly sensitive having really big reactions. And as a parent who's maybe not so sensitive, might think, why are you reacting in this way? This is not a big deal. And so this partner, going back to a partnership, might think, wow, this is a lot. This is so much. Just dial it down a bit. This is, being too sensitive, or why be so dramatic about it? And they may be a little bit overwhelmed by the intensity of the highly sensitive person, but also struggling to understand where these reactions are coming from. So if we don't have the understanding of temperament or the nervous system, we might end up arguing with each other's perspective about who's right, how bad the situation really was, or whose emotional reaction is more valid. But if we have this understanding and honouring of temperament, then we know we're all starting at different places and we all experience the world so differently, and each experience is valid, but just different.
And that brings in the compassion piece, right? Because now you understand each other. And I think when you think of a conflict, there's that perspective taking that could be really hard, but now you're at least understanding where that person is coming from. And it's not to give people labels, but we know if we interpret things a little differently, like getting to know ourselves is an important part of this when we think about interactions that we're having with others.
Absolutely.